Hi everyone, my name is Nidhi Dhiraj, and I will be presenting my research title, The Divine Emergence, Sacred Architecture and Mythic Placemaking at Naturally Occurring Shiv Lingam Sites. This presentation explores how certain sacred landscapes are not created through architecture, but are recognized through myth, ritual, and natural processes. When I use the term unbuilding the sacred, I am not arguing against architecture. I am questioning a much deeper assumption that sacredness is something architecture creates. Historically, sacred architecture has enclosed the divine, formalized belief into fixed forms, and equated permanence with faith. These ideas have reshaped how we build temples, shrines, and monuments. This paper challenges that inheritance. It proposes that the sacred already exists within landscape, myth, ritual, and ecological processes before any architectural intervention. If that is true, then architecture cannot begin by asserting authority. It must begin by undoing it. That is why this approach is called unbuilding and not non building. Architecture is still present, but it listens before it acts. In Hindu cosmology, nature was never understood as a neutral or empty space. Landscape was not a backdrop to the divine events, but it was the divine itself. The Rig Veda speaks of rivers as mothers and goddesses, while the Bhumi Sukta of the Atharva Veda addresses the earth as a living consciousness presence that sustains all life. The Upanishads go further, collapsing all distinctions between the natural and the divine by declaring Sarvam Khalvidam Brahma. All that exists is Brahman. Puranic myths translate this philosophy into geography. Mount Kailasa is not where Shiva resides, it is Shiva. The Ganga is not water alone, but a goddess whose descent sanctifies the land. In this worldview, sacred space does not require construction to become meaningful. It emerges through recognition, ritual, movement, and continued engagement with landscape. Architecture, therefore, does not create sacredness, it merely mediates an encounter with what is already present. These are a few images of elements that have been personified into gods and goddesses. We have Mother Earth, who is the Bhumi Devi. We have Tulasi Devi, or goddess Tulasi. Tulasi is a plant that we pray to. And we have Lord Varuna, the Lord of the Ocean. This brings me to the idea of sacredness preceding form. In Hindu tradition, the sacred does not begin with architecture. It begins with myth, ritual, and belief long before walls are raised or sanctums are built. Myth here is not metaphor. It operates as a spatial instruction manual. It tells people where to walk, where to pause, what to circumambulate, and how to encounter the divine through movement and landscape. Epics and Puranic myths and narratives repeatedly situate sacredness along journeys through forests, riverbanks, mountains, and thresholds, rather than inside enclosed structures. Architecture, when it eventually appears, does not create sacred meaning, it merely follows it, giving material support to practices that were already spatially and ritually alive. Shiva provides the philosophical key to this argument. In Shaiva thought, Shiva is not defined through oppositions. He is formless yet emerging, ascetic yet a householder, still yet dynamic. These are not contradictions, they are expressions of non dualism. The Nirvana Shatakam describes Shiva as beyond virtue and sin, pleasure and pain, a pure consciousness that precedes all categories. When this philosophy is translated into space, it dissolves the boundary between nature and divinity. Mountains, rivers, fire, and stones are not symbols of Shiva, they are manifestations of Him. If the divine is not separate from nature, then architecture cannot claim authorship over sacredness. Its role shifts from producing meaning to mediating an encounter with what already exists. The Shiv Lingam offers one of the clearest challenges to architecture's impulse to build the sacred. Many of the most revered lingams in Shaiva tradition are not carved or installed. They are Swayambhu, self manifested, shaped by water, erosion, and geological time. These lingams do not ask to be enclosed or perfected. Their power lies precisely in their refusal of form and authorship. Architecture in such places does not generate meaning, it gathers quietly around what already exists, allowing landscape and ritual to lead the encounter. The lingam that was never built reminds us that sacred emerges and is not constructed. The myth of Lingodbhava tells of Shiva appearing as an endless column of fire, a form that neither Brahman nor Vishnu could comprehend or measure. This was not an object that could be contained, it was an assertion of infinity. At Tiruvannamalai, this myth becomes geography. The Arunachala hill is worshipped as a physical manifestation of that primordial flame. The fire does not descend into a shrine, it hardens into landscape. In this setting, the sacred is no longer enclosed within walls. The mountain itself becomes the temple, and architecture steps back to allow encounter between devotee, myth, and terrain. Girivalam, the circumambulation of Arunachala hill, demonstrates how sacred space is produced through movement. The 14-kilometer path, marked by directional lingams and ritual pauses, creates a continuous sacred landscape. Here, walking becomes worship. These landscapes reveal a kind of architecture that has no singular author. The path around Arunachala was not drawn, it was woven into being by centuries of walking. The riverbank is not designed, it is consciously reshaped by water, ritual, and season. This is architecture without architects. Spatial intelligence produced through collective ritual, mythic instruction, and material process. It is not lesser architecture. In many ways, it is more precise because it responds directly to time, use, and ecology. Today, these landscapes face intensified pilgrimage and material pressure. Let us read into more about the present times and understand how this affects the present day. These landscapes are designed but not by architects. They are shaped by ritual, geology, and time. But devotion has reached a breaking point. What was once a careful relationship between belief and landscape is now straining under scale, speed, and permanence. This is the architect's dilemma. How do we assert authorship, or do we learn restraint? The challenge today is not to create sacredness but to ensure that our interventions do not erase what already exists. Swami Vivekananda reminds us that spiritual life was never meant to be one dimensional. Bhakti, karma, gnana, and raja yoga were conceived as a balanced whole. What we witness today at Arunachala and along the Narmada is not too much faith, but faith practiced in isolation. Bhakti without karma forgets responsibility. Bhakti without gnana forgets consequence. And bhakti without raja forgets restraint. The result is unintended ego, the belief that devotion alone justifies excess. The ecological strain we see is not a failure of belief, but a failure of balance. Sandhya Vandanam shows us a different ethic of the sacred. It is not episodic or spectacular. It is daily, precise, and restrained. Here, devotion is inseparable from discipline. Bhakti is held in check by knowledge, action, and self control. If imbalance at our sacred landscape stems from devotion practiced alone, Sandhya Vandanam reminds us that tradition itself already contains a narrative. Ian McHugh reminds us that the most responsible form of design begins with refusal. His work insists that land is not neutral, it carries constraints, capacities, and limits. In many ways, that mirrors that sacred landscapes have always practiced. The hill dictates movement, the river dictates appearance and disappearance. Mekhak gives us modern language to an ancient wisdom. Design must collaborate with nature, not override it. Sacred architecture today must learn when not to build. Its task is not to declare meaning but to make space for encounter. It to guide movement without enclosure, to protect ecosystems without erasing ritual. When architecture stops competing with divinity, it can finally stand beside it. In this shift, the architect is no longer the author of the sacred but its caretaker. I would like to conclude by saying that the sacred does not need to be built. It already exists within landscape, within material, within memory. Architecture's responsibility today is not to assert presence but to practice restraint. In doing so, it does not disappear, it finally learns how to stand beside the divine. Thank you very much. That's the end of the presentation.